Why would anyone care? The conversion story of Mr. Fred Rogers to the Catholic Church by Thomas S. Venditti. Why would anyone care whether or not Mr. Fred Rogers became a Catholic shortly before his death on February 27, 2003, in his Squirrel Hill apartment near Pittsburgh, PA? Why would anyone care that a Presbyterian minister received the Catholic Sacrament of the last rites from his good friend Abbott Nowicki, Order of St. Benedict, right before his death from stomach cancer? Why would the testimony of Joanne Rogers and Abbott Nowicki, OSB, be ignored or denied by Catholic leaders familiar with the story? These are just a few of the questions I am going to try to address in this mini-book. The reason I have an interest in this story is because I am a Roman Catholic who takes his faith seriously. I have studied and taught theology for close to 40 years. In a culture where religious freedom is celebrated, I find it very interesting to learn about one's spiritual quest for God and truth, especially if the person is Mr. Rogers. Spending years as a Catholic in the USA, I have observed a trend to celebrate conversions from Protestantism to Catholicism and vice versa. A good example of this is the conversion of Scott Hahn, as described in his book, Rome Sweet Home. Scott's conversion to Catholicism was a major story because he was a former Presbyterian minister. There is a show on EWTN Catholic Network called Coming Home, where the host interviews and celebrates the conversions of former Protestants to Catholicism. Yet because Fred Rogers was received into heaven after receiving the Catholic sacraments only moments before his death, very few people are celebrating or even talking about his deathbed conversion. I personally became involved in the story after visiting Buttermilk Falls County Park in New Florence, Pennsylvania, Indiana County. Here is the location of a 45-foot waterfall. This beautiful property was formerly owned by Fred Rogers' grandfather, Mr. Fred McFeely. Fred Rogers played here as a boy and loved every moment at his grandfather's vacation cottage. While visiting the park, I witnessed Fred Rogers' pictures, quotes, and history on my way to the waterfall along the trail. There are 10 wooden boards with famous Fred Rogers quotes as you make your way to the waterfall. Living so close to Buttermilk Falls really made this visit special for me. So I decided to look more into the life of Fred Rogers. My discovery of the real Mr. Rogers has been a blessing for me. Learning about his life and music and faith has had a deep impact on my life. I have come to believe that Fred Rogers was a saintly man with a prophetic gift who has had a great impact on children and continues to be a major influence to this day. While visiting the waterfall, I couldn't help but notice the many beautiful trees on the property. I have learned that Fred Rogers loved trees and even wrote songs about trees. I have listened to all of his songs on the Spotify app and have even learned to play them on my guitar. I quickly realized that Fred Rogers was defending the kingdom of nature just as fervently as Pope Francis is defending her today with his teachings found in his second encyclical entitled Laudato Si. Preserving the environment was a big part of Fred's message to children, and he filled his show with nature and animals. In addition to love of nature and a call to an environmental conversion, Fred Rogers also was a welcoming person to every human being he came across, including people who identified as being homosexual. This was made known by one of his actors on this show, who was welcomed by Fred, but also counseled by Fred to try to live as a Christian. Fred's Presbyterian denomination split over the issue of welcoming people who identified in this way, and Fred's family sided with the welcoming position. This also interestingly resembles the position of Pope Francis today. The Pope has made it clear that people with same-sex attraction are welcome to come to church and seek God's mercy like everyone else. Fred seemed to have a sense of Catholic spirituality when it came to certain controversial issues. History clearly affirms the religious background of Fred Rogers to be Presbyterian. He eventually became a Presbyterian minister and remained a Presbyterian until his deathbed conversion via the sacrament administered by Arch-Abbot Nowicki, OSB. It is interesting to note that Arch-Abbot Nowicki and his assistant, Father Max Maxwell, OSB, were the only ministers present with Fred at his passing. Catholics understand that the role of the priest is of critical importance at the time of preparing for death. The priest has the authority from God to minister forgiveness and healing and preparation for the soul to meet God after death. The apostolic absolution comes directly from an unbroken line to the apostles and Jesus Christ. This has been the tradition and teaching for 2,000 years of church history, and Arch-Abbot Nowicki knew he had a job to do before he died. According to Father Anthony Carbone, pastor at Holy Trinity Church in Ligonier, Pennsylvania, with a history in canon law, the Arch-Abbot would have had to have seen a sign or have evidence that Fred Rogers wanted the Catholic Sacrament before he could administer it. This is because the Catholic Sacraments are permanent in that they accomplish their goal. For Fred Rogers to receive the last rites as a Presbyterian, the Arch-Abbot would have needed some proof that Fred desired to die as an initiated Catholic by effect of the grace of God administered through the sacrament. Fred Rogers was known to have spent much time in prayer with the monks at St. Vincent College. He had amazing respect and interest in Catholic spirituality. His close friend, Father Henry Nouwen, was said to have a similar personality as Fred, as described in this beautiful article, www.livinglutheran.org, Henry Nouwen - Fred Rogers and a life rooted in good soil. Mysticism seemed to be the spirituality that Fred most identified with, considering his own life and advice he gave to others. He advised people on starting their day in quiet prayer and meditation. Studying Catholic mystics will have a profound impact on anyone seeking enlightenment and a deeper, more personal union with Jesus Christ. There were actually plans for Fred to move to St. Vincent College so he could be more involved with the spirituality of the Benedictines. Arch-Abbot Nowicki clearly had substantial evidence that Fred Rogers would want the Catholic Sacrament before death. In addition to Fred's gravitating towards Catholic mysticism and worshiping with the monks at St. Vincent Archabbey, Arch-Abbot Nowicki asked Joanne Rogers, Fred's wife, before his death, after Fred fell into a coma, whether he could administer the sacrament to her husband Fred. His wife Joanne agreed. This is noted in The Good Neighbor, The Life and Work of Fred Rogers by Maxwell King, Disc 11. Fred had become very sick from stomach cancer and quickly became bedridden until his death. Everything happened so quickly that decisions had to be made without the luxury of time. Did the Arch-Abbot have enough evidence to proceed with the sacrament, or should he just give a blessing, which was the other option for a non-Catholic? The Arch-Abbot chose to administer the sacrament, which I believe was the right choice, and celebrate his decision to initiate Fred into the universal Catholic family and heaven. Arch-Abbot Nowicki and his assistant, Father Max Maxwell, should be commended for this amazing witness. Typically, this type of conversion would be a well-known story. Catholics who celebrated and broadcasted Scott Hahn's conversion have been silent about Fred's conversion. Is it because they don't know about it? Is there something about Fred Rogers' life or beliefs that is the problem? Is it the fact that he was in a coma while receiving the sacrament that has silenced this 20-year-old story? These were a few of the questions I had as I was researching Mr. Rogers' conversion. Currently, I work part-time at St. Vincent College in Latrobe as trolley driver on campus. Trolley is a replica of the trolley used in Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. Because of this position, I've had the opportunity to speak with many people about his story. Most people are very happy to hear this story. And interestingly enough, however, I have been told by one person that Fred Rogers only received a blessing and not the sacrament. I was also told by a high-ranking Catholic that Fred died a Presbyterian. This contradicts the written record and testimony of the witnesses, including Fred's Protestant wife, Joanne, found in The Good Neighbor, The Life and Work of Fred Rogers by Maxwell King, Disc 11. This also reveals a lack of understanding of the permanent nature of the sacraments and the need for a formal investigation into Fred's story and life. As more evidence for the correctness of the Archabbot's decision to administer last rites, Fred left most of his personal belongings to St. Vincent College, where the Fred Rogers Institute is located. His piano from childhood, his puppets, sweaters, fan mail, etc., are all on display at St. Vincent College. The monks and faculty have all been exposed to, and many of them have incorporated the teachings and philosophy of Fred Rogers into their Catholic lives and curriculums. There seems to be no contradictions between Fred's beliefs and the Catholic Church at St. Vincent. Fred lived, preached, and taught that all life is sacred and needs to be respected. His focus on children was extremely prophetic, considering the breakdown of the traditional family and the devastating impact this has had on children. Fred clearly believed in the sanctity of human life, beginning in the womb and extending throughout human life, which included respect for animals and nature. He taught children that boys will become men and girls will become women in his song, "What Do You Do with the Mad That You Feel?" 1997. He cared about children's feelings and emotions and fears. He tried to address them tenderly as Christ did, welcoming them as equals as Christ taught us. So why in these times, 2024, under the pontificate of Pope Francis, is the message of Fred Rogers so relevant? Personally, I believe that God is trying to call all of humanity into a Catholic understanding of respecting the kingdom of nature, where God has placed humans to be good stewards of his creation. Fred did this over and over again by calling his audience to an environmental conversion. This is also a critical time to protect the traditional family from attacks of every kind. This is also something Fred did consistently over his career without compromise. Fred's conversion story is a great example and a possible solution to the divisions within Christianity. Instead of Christians spending their time trying to convert each other, why not allow, without pressure, other people to decide how and where they will worship God? Of course, share your faith to inspire others, but not to correct or put down another's faith. Allow people to explore spirituality and come to their own convictions. Fred obviously had a positive experience as a Presbyterian. In Maxwell King's biography, he mentions how much Fred enjoyed going with his parents to Latrobe Presbyterian Church as a boy. He had many fine memories of his seminary days as well. If your neighbor is a happy Methodist or Baptist, rejoice with them, but always be ready to share your faith when asked. Your love, respect, and acceptance of your neighbor's religious freedom will be a good witness to Catholicism. Ultimately, Fred began leaning towards Catholic mysticism as his true spirituality. Perhaps he would have converted to Catholicism apart from his deathbed if he didn't get sick so quickly after his retirement in 2003. Maybe his example can be a message to non-Catholics that there is always time to become Catholic while you are alive. This includes your final moments on earth when you have the right to request to see a priest and receive the final sacrament from the successors of the apostles. The Code of Canon Law provides that the last rites may be given to any Catholic disposed to receive them. They may also be given to baptized non-Catholics who cannot approach a minister of their own community and who spontaneously ask for them, provided that they demonstrate the Catholic faith in respect of these sacraments and are properly disposed. Canon 844. If a sick person isn't baptized, he can request baptism, which acts as the gateway to the sacraments. 849. Canon law also adds the anointing of the sick is not to be conferred upon those who obstinately persist in a manifestly grave sin. 1007. To deny the effects of the sacrament is to deny the power of God. If a lifelong Protestant receives the last rites, they will receive the same benefits of the sacrament as someone who was Catholic their whole life long as they desire it. God's grace works this way without partiality. Scripture refers to the parable of the workers who were hired late in the day and received the same reward as those who were working all day. In my research, I started hearing about people who experienced some type of healing through the prayers and voice and songs of Fred Rogers. This testimony seems to indicate we might have a saint with us. This would be a YouTube video, alleged miracle of Fred Rogers. This young girl claims to have been healed, and after watching Fred Rogers and being visited by him in the hospital, there are others as well who have reported healings through Fred Rogers. The possibility exists that God has called Mr. Rogers to be a canonized saint who has the gift from God to help people on earth. This gift needs to be investigated by the church so that others might be inspired by this wonderful human being from Latrobe, PA, to love God and neighbor every day of your life. I have contacted Bishop Larry Kulik from the Diocese of Greensburg, as well as Bishop Zubik from the Bishop Office of Pittsburgh Diocese, to ask their assistance and guidance in the investigation of the life and conversion of Fred Rogers, to see if God has called him to be canonized formally in the Catholic Church so that his message and example can be shared universally. If you care about the spiritual life and journey of Fred Rogers, please join me and contact Bishop Zubik and ask him to support the investigation into the possible canonization of Mr. Rogers. Quote, in order to begin such a process, first I would need to hear from the many faithful Catholics like yourself who believe that Mr. Rogers' cause should be investigated. This came from Bishop Zubik through Reverend Michael S. Cedar, Director for Canonical Services, Office of the Diocesan Bishop, Diocese of Pittsburgh, 2900 Noblestown Road, Pittsburgh, PA, 15205. And you can call as well Reverend Michael Sater at 412-456-3010. We have a bishop who has responded to this booklet, Bishop Joseph L. Coffey, United States Military Archdiocese. Quote, Tom, I just read your booklet about Fred. It's great. I enjoyed it. I hope people get to know the man and not the caricature of the kind old man in the red sweater. I think it is great that you are helping to educate people about this holy and good man. Fred Rogers' Journey to the Catholic Church by Thomas S. Venditti. Thank you for listening. Please call the Diocese of Pittsburgh and let them know how you feel. God bless, and have a beautiful day in your neighborhood.